You're listening to the When Life Hands You Lennon's podcast.
But in an entry-level film production, it's one strike and you're out. You're fired. I'm not calling you back.
If your goal today is to make a basket, we're gonna make that basket.
The minute you create something, as soon as it's made tangible, you have a copyright in it.
How do I get our guys to sound that big, that full when they do the harmonies?
And I'm your host, Lennon Seahawk. Let's get to the show. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of When Life Hands You Lennon's. This week's episode features Canadian entertainment and intellectual property lawyer Kurt Dahl. Now, this is a really interesting episode. I love talking with attorneys because they have such a diverse background on how the music business works and what deals are happening, commonalities, things that are not so common, and then things to look out for, because it's always good to protect your interests as well as who you're collaborating with, and making sure that you're not getting screwed out of a bad deal. And believe it or not, they still do happen. Kurt talks about how you can find a really good attorney. What are some of the green flags to look for? What are some of the red flags to look for? He also talks about bad deals, and he talks about how Tones and I, who is an Australian artist who had her song Dance Monkey blow up overnight. He tells that story and how he helped negotiate that deal when there was a label bidding war. We briefly talk about the Metaverse and NFTs and how they interact with copyrights and how the law currently sits with those. We also talk about publishing catalog sales, how a lot of artists like Bruce Springsteen are selling their publishing catalogs for massive amounts of money. What is that? What does that mean for the artist and musician? What is the publishing catalog? Why is it worth so much? How are they getting these numbers? And then we also talk about template agreements, how they can help you protect yourself and how an attorney can draft one and why an attorney should draft one. So before we get into the episode, I want to remind you to sign up to my email list. It helps me notify you when new episodes like this are live. The link is in the show notes below. You can also sign up via my website, which is lennonseahawk.com. I would also appreciate if you would follow me on Instagram and leave me a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. You can follow me on Instagram at Lennon Seahawk, LENNONCIHAK. I post some personal musings and music business stuff there, and you can follow me and reach out to me with any questions on this episode or any other episode you listen to. And a 5-star rating or review would be greatly appreciated on Spotify now. I believe you can do that now. You just have to go into the episode and click 5 stars, and then Apple Podcasts as well. Lastly, if you or somebody you know would be a good guest for the show, there is a link to a guest request form in the show notes, so fill that out and I will get back to you. Without further ado, let's dive into this incredible, riveting, and insightful conversation with entertainment attorney Kurt Dahl. Kurt, thank you so much for being on the show. I'll do kind of a formal introduction after, once I get some more information on what the podcast will be about. But I'm really excited to have you on the show. You're an attorney in Canada, and I don't think I've ever had an attorney from Canada on the show. So this is a first.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure. And, I've listened to many of your podcasts, and it's just an honor. Like anytime I'm talking about the music biz, I feel like it's a great day, and that's your specialty. So I love it. It's an honor.
Yeah, thank you. So give us a little brief overview of who you are. Are you a musician yourself? I know that your website is Lawyer Drummer. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I'm the only lawyer that I know that can have hair like this. So it's because I'm a musician as well, But yeah, so my story, up here in Canada, and I mean, all across America, increasingly, which is always great to see. I'm known as the Lawyer Drummer. So, basically, I've been a musician all my life. That's always been sort of the guiding light in my world, I guess. I've played in bands for the last 20 years. I've toured the world. The band I'm in Canada is called One Bad Son. We've had some #1 songs in the country. We opened for the Rolling Stones. Wow. We've, toured all over the place, toured Europe and America. And but along the way, you know, my other passion is law. And so I became a lawyer along the way. And I only ever wanted to be one kind of lawyer, and that's entertainment lawyer. You know, I never considered doing any other type of law, you know. And again, I couldn't be another kind of lawyer with this kind of hair, so I didn't want to do it, you know. But I wanted to help my fellow musicians, right? Because growing up, I've always I love reading rock and roll biographies, you know, and one of the common threads in all these biographies is that all my idols were screwed over by someone in a suit, you know, and so I thought, I want to be the guy that saves musicians from that happening and helps them, you know, sort of be a shield for artists. And, you know, you fast forward 11 years later and I'm doing that now. And, you know, I've become one of the top entertainment attorneys here in Canada. And I do a lot of deals in America. And, you know, I think it's just, every day I get up and I love my job, and I'm lucky to say I've got 2 careers, and I love both, right? And it's a passion. So that's a brief summary.
Yeah. So you're in a band. Do you handle all of the legal stuff for the band, or do you kind of delegate that out and allow your creative brain to open up for that stuff?
Great question. I find that I do handle all the stuff because, you know, the band wouldn't want to pay someone else to do it, you know.
Fair.
You know, and they pay me in beer or something, you know. But
there you go.
You know, but yeah, I think, but like it's sort of 2 different hats to be put on, right? And like if we're writing songs or if we're on tour, it's like the musician hat is on, right? The lawyer hat only comes on if we're on tour and, you know, someone tries to, you know, pull a fast one on us or doesn't pay us or something like that. That I put on the attorney hat, but usually I try to keep the 2 separate for sure.
Good. How do you keep them separate? Do you find yourself trying to deviate into one or the other when you're trying to, like, even when you're working on a deal for a musician and you're like, as a musician, I would do this, that, and the other, or, you know, and then when you're in band mode and you're performing and you're like, the lawyer brain kicks in. So how do you keep them separate?
Yeah, well, no, I always wondered how I would do that, like years ago before both started to really blow up. You know, I was worried that they'd sort of be, you know, almost competing with each other and sort of at odds. But, you know, it's worked out that they don't really compete. They don't really interfere with each other. And to be honest, like, you know, in the early days of the band, like a decade ago, let's say, we were touring like crazy. We were on the road 9 months of the year. We're not doing that anymore. I mean, I've got 3 young kids. This law practice is crazy busy. Like we don't tour like we used to, and that's like by choice. So I'm lucky that as the band sort of slowed down a little bit, the law career really picked up. So I'm able to sort of keep them separate. But there was a time, you know, when we were touring like crazy, I'd be in the back of the bus, like literally driving down the highway, drafting and negotiating record deals, you know, and that's when those things, they did kind of overlap a bit. So instead of the rest of the guys would be like sleeping or whatever on the bus, and I'd be negotiating a deal. And then, you know, I just had to work hard, right?
Yeah.
And when you get to the show, get to the venue, I remember that we're touring with Def Leppard, and we're doing our first like arena show, arena tour. And we got to the arena, and I just finished negotiating a big deal for a client of mine in Canada. And we were playing in front of like 15,000 people or something. And I had to really just be okay, I'm set. I'm closing the laptop. The lawyer vibe is done because I want to enjoy this. I want to enjoy every effing moment because you don't get to tour arenas that often in life, right? So, but it's been a good problem to have, right? Like again, it's both sides. I'm super passionate about, so that makes it more enjoyable.
Sure. So I want to talk a little bit about, since you're the first Canadian attorney I've had on the show, I'm curious to see what are the differences between U.S. and Canadian law? Like, what could I hire an attorney in the United States to negotiate a Canadian deal, or how does this work?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, what I find, like the actual law itself, like the law, if I'm negotiating a Canadian deal or a US deal, like the law itself doesn't change, right? It's like, it's different if you're talking about like criminal law, like, you know, different states in America have different criminal laws, right? And
Sure.
Same with Canada. I mean, or like family law, like divorces in California are different than divorces in Texas, you know?
Yeah.
There's a lot more guns in the Texas divorce, you know, but,
Yes, there are.
anyways, but with entertainment law, it's like the terms of record deal aren't really that different. So, you know, like I've got clients that are, you know, I've got a lot of American clients, you know. What I always have to just tell them is that, hey, I'm not called to the bar in California, for example, you know, so if this ever went to court, if there's ever a dispute that, you know, involved like the court being involved, we would have to just get an LA lawyer to help us at that point, like a LA litigator. But that rarely happens. You know, it's mostly negotiating a deal, and then things are usually fine after that. So I've done a lot of U.S. deals, and then a lot of my Canadian clients are household names in America. So it's the deal itself is all American based, of course, but the artist is Canadian. So that's just a no-brainer for me. So and then there's cool situations like, for example, are you familiar with Tones and I?
Yes.
Like, you know, Dance Monkey?
Dance Monkey, yep.
Yeah, it was like the number 2 song in the world in 2020. So she's from Australia, and I was like, a lot of people read my articles on my website. So I try to give advice to artists that the powers that be don't want to share with artists, right? Like I try to answer the tough questions because I really believe in artist empowerment, you know? And so I'm writing these articles, and that's kind of where people got to know me, you know, across Canada and the US. Tones and I's manager was a big fan of these articles. And when she started to blow up, he messaged me. He's like, hey, would you help me out on this? Would you be her lawyer? And I said, well, she's in Australia. Like, I'm obviously not. But then we had, like, within a matter of 24 hours, like, he messaged me, and a day later, Dance Monkey blew up, and we had a full-on US major label bidding war. And so he's like, would you help me? And I was like, 100%. So in that situation, I helped negotiate the deal, and we just got sort of the help from a New York-based lawyer because, you know, all the labels were based in New York. So
Sure.
Sometimes you just you get the help or like someone from the US to sign off on it if it's all US law, but the principles are all the same. It's like a record deal is a record deal. Sure. It doesn't matter where it's from, but what's inside of it, what's contained in it is really important, right?
Mm-hmm. But if somebody infringes, say, on a Canadian artist's copyright, and how does that play out into Canadian courts? Like, if I infringed on one of your artists who's based in Canada for infringing on their copyrights by distributing something, what's the process there?
Yeah. So if, like, essentially you'd have to get a lawyer wherever that infringement is happening, right? So yeah, like if you are in LA and you infringe on a Canadian copyright, chances are the Canadian artist would have to hire me, and then we'd have to get the help of someone where you are to then, you know, come track you down, essentially, come knock on your door. But yeah, there is some jurisdiction issues that are sort of hurdles that you have to get over. But at the end of the day, entertainment law, doesn't matter where I've got clients in the UK and clients in Australia. There's hurdles to the jurisdiction question, but at the end of the day, like entertainment law, it's all very much connected and it's all very much similar.
Yeah, that's a good point. That helps because I don't know how all this works, and the jurisdiction stuff gets really confusing, and so yeah, that definitely helps. So a lot of people are intimidated by attorneys, especially musicians. They can be expensive. Everything when you get an attorney involved, things can get messy. They just get dragged out. What advice would you have for a musician who's starting to get up, like a Tones and I, where one day she's kind of a nobody, and then the next day she's a global superstar? Yeah. And so talk about why it's important to have an attorney lining these things up before something like situation with Tones and I.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I feel like I try to sort of dispel that myth every day, like in terms of, there is like a stigma with between musicians and lawyers, right? And for good reason. A lot of lawyers are assholes, you know. And I try to really sort of break that stereotype, right? Again, the fact that I've been a musician, toured in a van for 20 years, like I get it, you know. And you're right. I think I think there's a lot of distrust because, and I've come across like I deal with a lot of lawyers, obviously, and I don't trust a lot of them, right? And there's some great ones, but there's some ones that are really sketchy. And so I think it's, find someone you trust first and foremost. But and why do you need an entertainment lawyer? Well, the Tones and I is a great example. I mean, the deals that were first being offered, because she just started to blow up, and you get these sort of sharks that kind of come circle the water, and they were offering really bad deals. She almost took one, and then her manager's like, "What do you think about this?" And I said, "Walk away. This is a horrible deal." And like she was ready to sign like that. It was like a Friday night, and I said, "Do not do it." And had she signed that, it would have been like an absolute nightmare. Like this label would have made, $20 million, and Tones would have got like, a couple $100,000 or something, right? And so we said no. We ended up getting the right deal in place, and I won't say the amount, but like she overnight became a millionaire that never had to worry about money. Like not just a millionaire, but like you don't have to worry about money anymore. Which I love those kind of moments. I just love because I know how hard musicians work, and if I can allow like a client of mine to never have to worry about money anymore, like it's the greatest gift, right? Because then they can focus on whatever the hell they want to focus on, the music. Or with Tones and I, she's a big environmentalist, and so like like give money to charity, do whatever you want. But I think, and then I think, and that's obviously an extreme example of Tones and I. But in general, I mean, I get a lot of musicians that send me contracts that are just really bad, and there is a lot of great people in the music biz, some of the best people I've ever met, but there's also a lot of sharks, and I think that they sort of prey on musicians because typically musicians, a lot of them don't like to think about the business side of the music business, right? Yeah. And that's a generalization, but like in a lot of ways it's true. So these people come along and sort of dangle a carrot, and you sign away your life essentially just for that chance of succeeding. And if this was in the regular business world, like outside of the music biz, these contracts would never fly. But because people's dreams are at stake, they're willing to sign these things. And that's where I come in. I'll come in and say, listen, like, let's just separate, put the dream on the side for a second. Let's look at this contract and look at how hard you're working and all you're giving up, and all you get back is like this much. That's just not fair, So let me come in and be your advocate, and like I said, sort of be your shield. And then sometimes I act as the sword too, to really protect and defend artists, and at the end, and as far as the cost part, like, I think, at least I know for me, I'm a lot more reasonable than many artists would think. And a lot of times too, it's like, send a contract to someone like myself just to get, like, I'll tell you, walk away, or this looks okay, or it'll cost this much for me to like review it and revise it. So at least you have an idea of cost. But I've had artists sign a contract and then send it to me and say, "What now? Can you give me your opinion?" And it's like, I can't do anything with a signed contract, right?
No, that's not going to be helpful at all. I think the point that you made was really good about your dream. When people's dreams are involved, that's when the predators really come out and the sharks really come out. Because when you dangle $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 advance in front of somebody, they get googly eyes and they're like, "That would change my life." But that's in a month. That check will clear, and then what? In 5 years, you're not seeing any money. What's going on?
Yeah.
So it's, $500,000 is nothing to scoff at. That's, unless you're Drake or Justin Bieber, it's nothing.
Yeah.
But for an artist that's just trying to get their career started, it's really predatorial for these people to dangle big advances and stuff in front of people and then screw them over.
You're right. Like in the long term, right? It's all about knowing your worth and also finding the right partners, right? Like some of the labels I work with, a lot of them are in the States. They're great labels, and they're like actually like teammates, with the artists. Yeah. And I've seen it all sorts of deals, and I've even done with the major labels. I've got some great contacts at the majors that I really trust. So it's not like the majors are all bad guys, but there's some great deals happening with the major labels, and it's all about finding the right home for you as an artist, and then having a good attorney negotiate it. Because again, like whatever I charge on a deal, like I always try, and I think I always succeed at giving way more value than what I'm charging, right? Like, you know, taking a deal like, well, again, the Tones and I example, I mean, she like literally, I would have saved her and made her, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars over the period, over the few months, right? And I think it's like, yeah, just not understanding the value of you as an artist, but also understanding the value that a good lawyer can bring to the table.
Mm-hmm. So, are you seeing deals that are getting better, that are not as shitty as they were 10, 15, 20 years ago? Or are you seeing much fairer deals towards the artist coming across your table, and there's like, okay, this is actually something we can work with, versus no, we need to just cancel this and totally restart. Like, this is not even something to think about.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, when an artist is hot, like when an artist has sort of a bidding war thing happening where a bunch of labels are interested, and these days it's like it's all happening through TikTok. So if they're blowing up on TikTok, the labels just come running, when you have that sort of hype, you can sort of name your price to some extent. Yeah. And then for me, it's great because I kind of get to play the labels off each other a bit, right? And, we have to be careful. You have to do it in the right way. But, you get a bit of a bidding war happening, you can really make a deal that's like amazing for your client, right? Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, that's not the majority of the time, right? Like there's not always bidding wars happening. It's usually you're trying to fight for a deal to get a deal in the first place. And then the label can sense that. If the label knows that they're the only one interested, then, they want to try to lowball you a bit, right? So it really comes down to like how experienced is your lawyer in negotiating these things. Mm-hmm. But, it's like I find TikTok to be fascinating because it really has changed the game in the last like year and a half, 2 years. Some clients of mine, they do so well on TikTok, like they'll play a show on TikTok or whatever, or they'll get, use their fans on TikTok to play a show through Patreon or whatever. They don't even like, they make more money playing shows from the bedroom than they would on tour, right? So sure. So it's sort of like, and then it's also like, do they need a record label if they've got this platform to reach everyone? That's, I think, a great question that TikTok brings up is, do artists need labels all the time? And I think some artists do not, right? But I think record labels, they're still serving a purpose if they know what they're doing, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, labels have been doing this for how many decades, like in terms of releasing music. I think they have at least the good ones have a lot of knowledge to share with artists. But I mean, it's a really important question. If you're killing it on TikTok, do you need a record label? And I would say that the answer is no for a lot of artists.
So at what point would you consider getting a record label? Because I know a lot of artists are like, okay, and now I need a record deal. Like they hit this threshold and they're like, okay, now I need a record deal. I need a record deal to take it to the next step. When in reality, you don't. It might actually be worse for your career. So at what point should an artist, whether they're blowing up on TikTok or Twitter or whatever, and what point would they need to start considering a label?
Yeah, and that's another great question. It really, like, I guess for each of my clients, what I do is I sit down and say, what are your goals? Like, as an artist, like some artists, they don't want to tour. They want to they're kind of like a homebody or whatever. They, or some people just, got kids at home and they don't want to leave them. And so some are just like strictly recording artists that don't want to tour. So it's good to know that, right? We don't have to worry about getting that whole touring machine going. Sure. But also, like, what are your goals? Like, so but if you do want to be like, Rihanna, like selling out arenas or whatever, then a lot of times to get to that level, a lot of times the major labels are the ones that can do it best, right? Like if you're talking about hitting like an Adele level of success, I mean, she, arguably you can't get to that massive of an audience without the help of a big label. But again, there's like, so one of my clients, Coulter Wall, he's like this great like Americana sort of singer-songwriter. guy, and he's got like a distribution deal with a great distributor in Nashville. So they make sure his product is everywhere, and they get him some good press and that sort of stuff. But he owns he owns the recordings. So
Wow.
It's pretty amazing. Like, he's got this catalog of records that he owns, and he always will own them. And it's like, it just means way more money for him on the back end. You get a bit less on the front end, like in terms of an advance.
Sure.
But you own it on the back end. So like you said, it's sort of playing the long game and understanding what each artist's goals are. And then it's like, okay, do we want to team up with a major label or a small label? Or maybe not. So yeah, it's every artist is different. That's what I've realized is, in the old days, you sort of like, you had to get a major label deal if you wanted to succeed and have people hear you. But now it's not the case. So now it's more like, what are your goals, I guess, is the real question.
Yeah, and to the point of Adele, it's like when you have the major labels' power of multi-million-dollar budgets, not every artist has access to that at all, unless you're friends with a billionaire. But that's even rarer. But so having that power of a major label, being able to just dedicate, like obviously Adele, they're going to throw so much tens of millions of dollars at her campaigns because they know they're going to make it on the back end. And they're going to make it back. So with the distribution deal, what's the difference between a distribution deal and a regular record deal? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of record deals, there's two different kinds on the record deal side. Like, one is where the label owns the masters, like the actual recording copyrights forever. And then what's more artist friendly than that is like a licensing deal where the label is licensed certain rights for X amount of years, let's say 10 years. And then at the end of that 10-year period, all those rights revert back to the artist. So then you could, in theory, like release your own greatest hits, or re-release your classic albums on your own label, right? And that's where you see a lot of big artists like, I think Springsteen, he's trying to buy back his masters from the labels, and, Rolling Stones have like a Rolling Stones imprint. So I think they bought back some of their records and then re-release them, and then they get 100% of the revenue. Whereas a distro deal is, less money invested by the label, but they don't own the masters at all. They just have the right to distribute them. So get them in stores, but that's less and less of a thing. But get them in digital stores. Like they get them on playlisting on Spotify and whatever, right? So like distro would be the most artist friendly, but again, you get the least investment from a label. Sure. And then licensing would be in the middle, and then full on master ownership for the label would be the biggest commitment.
Okay. And what's the benefits, aside from the ownership side, where is the label making the money on a distribution deal? Like you were talking about it, I'm like, where are they getting a deal? Are they getting an advance or are they taking a percentage of the royalties?
Exactly. Yeah. So every record sold, they would get say 30% of the proceeds, right? Okay. That's the big, yeah. It's like a cut of the sales. Yeah.
Okay. That's kind of what I thought, but I wasn't sure. So you mentioned Bruce Springsteen. A lot of these artists are selling their publishing catalogs. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that these days?
It's so interesting. I find it fascinating because I also like to compare, who's selling for more, right? Yeah. I'm a huge Bob Dylan fan, and he just sold his catalog, and it's happening. Like it's Neil Young, and I find it fascinating. I think what it is, a lot of them that I just mentioned are all getting up there in age, right? So, I think that's part of it. It's like if they sell it now. Like basically, it's like essentially these companies come in and buy catalogs. They evaluate the catalog and say, I think over the next 30 years it'll be worth this much. So we want to buy it off you for this much, and it's obviously a lot lower, but it's still a sizable amount, and it allows the artist. So for Bob Dylan, he could take whatever it was, let's say 30 million. He could take that 30 million and invest it, or as he's getting up in age, it like lets him sort of see where his money's going to go, right? If he just dies tomorrow, and he's not going to know where it goes, right? I think that's part of it is, so you could say, okay, I'm going to give some to this kid, or this ex-wife, or this charity, whatever, right? I think that's part of it. And it's also because they're older artists, I think it's a bit easier to predict what the catalog is worth, you know? Like if you're well, let's say let's say if you're Tones and I, for example, it's hard to predict where she's going to go in the next 20, 30 years as an artist, where Bob Dylan, Neil Young, it's like you can sort of, they're like in the sort of the golden years of their career. So it's easier to figure out, okay, here's what their catalog is worth, you know? And there's very complex, you know, calculation systems to do that, right? It's like you can look at, I mean, a lot of it is, this one company, Hypnosis, that they keep buying these catalogs, you know, and it's Merck. You know, he's an industry mogul, and he's brilliant. But basically, like they look at all the revenue streams from that catalog for the last 3 years, and they can sort of extrapolate the numbers to figure out what it should be worth. And then, of course, the artist can say, well, you know, I want to sell now or I don't. But I think it does give them a lot of sort of control over their sort of their estate. Really, it's like planning their estate before they're gone, you know.
And I guess you could say, like you were talking about Neil Young and Bob Dylan, I guess you could say they're kind of in their sunset clause of their career in lawyer speak.
I like that. Yeah, I like
that. So what is the benefit of what happens when they sell your publishing? Like they're selling their publishing catalog. What is that? What even is the publishing catalog? What does that mean?
Yeah, so I think that I always like to break it down to like, you know, there's two main copyrights in a song, right? There's one in the songwriting itself. Like if you and I sit down and write a song, well, that's a composition, that's the publishing. And then the second copyright is the recording of that song. So the songwriting usually involves publishers, and then the recording usually involves record deals. So, you know, essentially a good example would be like every time a Neil Young song is played on the radio, he gets paid as a songwriter. He gets paid a little bit as a like if he owned the master, which I'm sure he doesn't. I'm sure it's a label, but when you sell that song, if you go buy a Neil Young CD, the master, whoever owns the master gets paid. So, bottom line is, once he sells his catalog, he's not getting paid anymore when his song's played on the radio. It all goes to the publisher. So that's where it's like, that's where they better pay a lot for it, because he's giving up a lot, right? That's why these numbers seem crazy. Like we're talking, some of these catalogs are being bought for just millions and millions of dollars. It's because it's essentially like they're gambling, that they're betting that it's going to be worth that much at least in the long term, right?
I think it was Neil Young or Bruce Springsteen sold his. I think it was like $180 million. It was some astronomical amount, and it's like how the hell does a catalog get to be that massive? Especially now, it's like Bruce Springsteen. A lot of the younger kids, probably my age and below, don't really know who Bruce Springsteen is.
They don't know who the boss is. Yeah. Exactly. And it's interesting. And this is a whole other, this is a tangent, which I would love to, this is a whole other podcast, but, like how classic rock has never been bigger. Maybe not with the young, well, I mean, I'm torn because I see a lot of young kids with like Led Zeppelin shirts and Pink Floyd shirts and that kind of stuff, but they don't know modern rock, like new bands. Young kids don't know, like rock bands, young kids don't care about as much, like for rock, but they love like Led Zeppelin or The Doors or Jimi Hendrix, whatever, right? But if you think about it, like with Springsteen, like, or here's a good example, like Hotel California by the Eagles, like every second of every day it's being played somewhere, you know, like I hear it even just in my city, it's like I hear that song like 3 times a day. You know, it's like, so imagine that in every city and town in the world, or every coffee shop or restaurant or whatever, gym. So like when a song really becomes part of the sort of the social fabric, like a song like that has, it just, the number of plays it gets is so astronomical. So it really does generate that much money in the long term. And I think, you know, I think modern songs, some of them will have that sort of longevity, but a lot of them won't, right? Like it's something about that era. It's like sort of our parents' generation, like those songs. And maybe it's because back then, like if a song was a hit, it's almost like everyone knew of the song, you know, like, cause you had to listen to a radio or see it on MTV or whatever. So everyone everyone shared those big songs, right? Like Michael Jackson, Thriller, like everyone had that album, you know. Whereas these days it's a lot more fragmented. Everyone's got their own personal tastes. It's not like everyone's watching the same MTV or whatever. So there's less, like, songs get big these days, but they don't get as big as they did in that era. So I think that's why you're seeing these massive dollar amounts. It's all for the classic rock era, right? It's not, you don't see a lot of like new artists signing those massive deals, but I think that'll come eventually. Like eventually Beyonce or Jay-Z or Eminem, like those catalogs are going to be worth a lot, but I don't see them being sold yet anyways.
Is that common for artists to want to just build up a massive publishing catalog and then, you know, it's kind of like a startup. You build up a business and then you sell it. Is that common, or is that kind of a nuanced thing for these massive, iconic classic rock stars?
Well, a lot of like this whole like idea of selling off your catalog, like selling it outright, like I've only seen it come to be really popular in the last couple of years. But like what I have seen a lot of over the years is like, you know, you sign a publishing deal where you give half of your publishing to a publisher, but not all of it, right? And that's a big difference, right? So yeah, I think time will tell, you know. I mean, the interesting time that we live in right now is that people buy music less than ever before, like actual buying of, like, you know, in the old days, CDs or vinyl or cassettes. They buy it less than ever, but they use music more than ever, right? And use, I mean, like, music is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. When you walk out again at the mall or at a restaurant or at the gym, you know, it's always being played. So the use of music generates money for the publishing, and the purchase of music generates money for whoever owns the master. So I've seen this sort of teeter-totter thing happen where the master used to be worth so much, but now the publishing's worth so much more. So I think music's going to keep being used more than ever as we go forward. So it'll be interesting to see like where this goes, you know, in terms of publishing and selling it, you know?
Yeah, I think too, with, you know, TV shows and movies and everything just totally ramping up after, you know, the pandemic slowed everything down, I think we're already starting to see so many TV shows and movies and previews starting to come out, and festivals, and it's getting overwhelming to the sense of, you know, Netflix is constantly sending notifications, and Hulu and HBO. So I think in the sync licensing aspect, which is another massive revenue maker for publishing, is starting to make a big return as well. I mean, it's always kind of been there, but I think a lot of artists are starting to catch on to it and being like, oh, I can make how much money with the sync placement? I'm going to do that.
Yeah, I love sync, like film and TV placements for my clients. I love negotiating them, and yeah, it's sort of like found money in a lot of ways, you know. And to go back to Coulter Wall, like he's been placed 3 times in Yellowstone, and Yellowstone's like the biggest show out there right now, and it's good money, and it's like it's also just that recognition. Like a lot of people discovered him through Yellowstone, you know, and it's the same with any great placement. Like, you know, those iconic moments on TV or film, like when the right song is synced to it, it's powerful, man. And it really, like, sometimes the right placement. Well, I'm thinking of like Whitney Houston in The Bodyguard. Like that soundtrack was like, I would say her biggest moment as an artist, and it's because it was connected to those emotional moments that we're watching in the movie, right? And I think it's cool to see that.
Yeah, I think too, there's that one song in Ice Age that comes to mind. I always connect every time I hear it. I'm like, that song's from Ice Age, but that song was out long before Ice Age. And I also think of the theme song for Cops, Inner Circle's Bad Boys.
Love it.
Like, they're still making money. They've got houses paid for just on that placement alone.
Yeah, I love that. Bad Boys. Yeah.
That's such a classic one. So diving in kind of to the next subject, I know we've been talking for almost 45 minutes now, and I want to be cautious of your time as well. But I want to talk a little bit about NFTs and the Metaverse. Is that kind of a discussion that you're having with clients, or are clients bringing that stuff to you?
They are. I mean, like, I'll be honest. Like I've done some deals with NFTs, and I understand the value. Like this is crazy dollar amounts, but a lot of it's like, it's not I'm not an expert in it by any means. It's over my head to some extent. I mean, in terms of how much value is behind it, like I don't exactly get it, but I don't have to get something to appreciate its worth. You know what I mean?
Right. Of course. So what, if you don't mind discussing some of the unique things that you've worked on with that? I know you haven't had a lot of experience, but I'm curious to see what people are doing with them and how the law kind of incorporates with this stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, so what I see happening is like musicians are really understanding that like what they give to fans and customers essentially is a very special thing, right? Like their music is special. Just like, I mean, a live concert to me is so valuable because you can't replicate it, like that feeling, right?
No.
And I mean, arguably that's what NFT is. Like it's something that can't be replicated, right? So I mean, with Kings of Leon, they were pretty cool and ahead of the curve a bit, like to have their have their NFT be kind of like one of the first one that came with a record,
Yep.
So I think it's still emerging in the music biz. I think it's still very much in its early stages in the music biz.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think as an artist, if you can understand what it is that you offer to your fans that's so special that no one else can offer, and then if you can capture that in some sort of NFT, that's going to be the key to success, right? And then we can bundle it or like just think of a plan to release it in a way that really creates that excitement. Because if you just do a standard, like here's our album artwork in NFT form, it's like that's kind of not that sexy, right? That doesn't capture what it is that makes you as an artist so special. So it's a big discussion or a big thing to wrap your head around. What is it that makes us so special, and then try to capture it in an NFT.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of people starting to get scammed as well with it, and it's really unfortunate. One of the most recent people to get, or companies to get hit, was HitPiece, because they basically took Spotify's API and just imported it into their website, and then were selling NFTs based on that. And then, now they're getting hit with infringement suit after infringement suit. The major labels are going after them. And, I think they're in a world of hurt for the next decade. But it's very interesting to see how the law kind of is so behind, I think, on a lot of things, because it's not caught up to this technology stuff, and nobody really has the answers to what's going to happen next. Like it's such a murky water to play in, but everybody's playing in it, and we just keep getting dirtier and dirtier.
That's a great analogy. I like that.
I just came up with it on the spot. I was like, I'm going to go with this. So yeah, I think the NFT space in Metaverse space is so unique that nobody really knows what we're doing. So, kind of wrapping things up here, going back to the beginning of the episode, we talked about, attorneys being a little bit frightful, and some people are hesitant to get them, and they're expensive, and, whatever crosses their mind. But as an artist is looking for an attorney to kind of button up their business, because musicians are a business, what are some tips that you would provide somebody who is looking for an attorney?
Yeah, and I think it kind of relates to your question earlier, like when is the right time to have an entertainment lawyer, right? Like obviously the obvious time is if someone puts a contract in front of you, right? And this happened, like, again, I've had artists call me and be like, hey, I've already signed the deal, can you help me? And it's like, no. Just send it, like honestly, send it to me and say, what would it cost to look at this, right? And like, I might say nothing. If it's a quick answer, I'll say, okay, all good. But if it's like a complex deal, I'll say, here's what it'll cost, right? But, never sign something without getting advice on it. And I don't care if you get it from me or someone else, but get advice on it. It's like, if you don't want to invest in yourself and your career, then you're not going to make it, unfortunately, right? Like, right. I've seen too many bad deals signed, and then it's like, I try to get the artist out of it, and it ends up costing 10 times as much as if we just done it right the first time, But then, so that's the first situation. If someone puts a contract in front of you. But secondly, I think it's great to be proactive too. Like, so if you're co-writing songs with someone else or a bunch of people, have a co-writer agreement in place. And it can be a template agreement. It's fairly easy to draft, but you can use it in every situation. Because a lot of times, again, like I see songs blow up, and then all of a sudden the one person says, "Hey, I thought I was like 80% writer," and then you're like, "No, I think it's like 50-50." And that's when everything's fine until the money starts rolling in, and then it's like people often show their true colors. Same with if you're in a band. I mean, a band agreement is so important. Like, who owns the band name? Who owns the recordings? What are the songwriting splits? How is money divided? How do you hire someone or fire someone in the band? Like, these things, if you don't discuss them and get them in a contract, things can really get bad. And if someone leaves the band, like say you want to fire someone who's just an asshole, fire them without something in writing, they could stop you from using the songs that they played on, right? So you may have your hit record recorded, you fire this person, but you can't release the record unless you get them to sign off on something now. So, I mean, it's just, there is a lot to be said for like being being proactive, right? And same with, if you're not in a band, but say you're just a singer that is doing things solo, but you hire a producer to like record some songs for you, get something in writing with the producer. Like, I've seen so many conflicts between producer and artist. It's just not funny. And sometimes producers can be amazing and sometimes they can be the opposite. And, it's like, I've seen people like producers hold an artist over a barrel and say, you can't release the songs until you pay me X amount of dollars or something. Right. And that's when it gets really dangerous.
Mm-hmm. So what is a template agreement? Is that something that can be drafted by an artist or a person themselves, or should that be drafted by an attorney?
I mean, and this sounds like a lawyerly answer, but I would say always get an attorney to do it. And the reason I say that is I've just seen what can happen. Like, if you sort of, like, sometimes clients of mine will go on the internet and try to find, a producer deal. But like, it just, like, every situation is unique, right? If you're an artist, and the contract should be tailored to that situation. So I've had contracts that are from the internet that just really miss the mark entirely. And then the artist goes to, release the song or whatever. And then they find out that the contract doesn't actually cover what they want it to cover. And the producer has certain rights that they didn't think they had. And I mean, again, it's like, I wouldn't go if I was having if I was getting a divorce, I wouldn't try to do it myself. I would hire an expert, Sure. Or if I had my tooth hurt, I wouldn't try to drill it out. I mean, I'd go to the dentist. But it's like, in life in general, I think it's always good. Like, there's certain times that you want to trust an expert, right? And I do this every day in my life for the past 12 years and then 10 years of school before that. So it's like, this is my passion. I know what I'm talking about. And I mean, again, it doesn't have to be me. It could be someone else, but get someone you trust who knows what they're talking about. Because it's going to save you stress and money in the long run. And also it's going to help you get to that next level in your career.
Mm-hmm. I had a friend who, she's an attorney in Orlando and does entertainment law as well. And she's a total rock star. And I had her on the podcast, and she was talking about a deal where a client of hers brought her a contract, and I think it was like a song release agreement or a group agreement. I don't remember exactly what it was. I talked with her a few years ago, but he had signed it, and he's like, what's your advice on this? And she's reading through it, and she's like, who's from Finland? Well, nobody. Well, it says right here in Finland, this is the jurisdiction, So it's like, if you get sued or you sue somebody for this, you have to take this out and you have to go to Finland to deal with this. And I think there's like, they realize like, oh shit, what did I do? But it's a good example of like getting that expert advice before you sign anything, because I'm not going to Finland to dispute something for copyright. Like, hell no, that's a long trip and time and money. And yeah, it was a really good example, but it's like, oh, wow. So kind of the last question, how do you find an attorney that you trust? What are some green flags and red flags to look for?
Yeah. I mean, I think like first and foremost, like you want someone who's responsive, right? Like, and I really, this is not to blow my own horn, but like, it's like, I think that I'm very responsive to my clients, and that's what sort of like separates me, I think, from a lot of other lawyers, especially with younger clients. Like, I'm just, I'm very connected, right? And it's part of it's like I don't work in an office. I work from my laptop, and I've done that for the last decade, but I work every day, right? So like I could be on vacation somewhere and I'm still plugged in and connected with my clients. I never want to miss a beat, right? And sometimes I have to work. I try to work to actually unplug a bit because I'm almost too plugged in sometimes. But like, find someone you can connect with who's accessible. I mean, if it was me, email me, go to my website, lawyerdrummer.com, shoot me an email, whatever, and then we could jump on a Zoom or jump on a phone call just to get to know each other, right? I think that helps establish trust, right? And obviously, if the lawyer takes 2 weeks to get back to you, and that's not the right fit, right? Or if you get on a phone call with them and you don't like them, well, then go to the next one, right? Like, I think it's like there's lots of lawyers out there to choose from. Find someone who you actually like. And, I've been super lucky that I get to work with some of the best people in the music biz, and a lot of them are my friends, and I always say it's like, if half my clients or more are people that I like to go for beers with, then, I've got a pretty good setup, right? A pretty good life. So, find someone you trust and someone who knows their stuff. I mean, they don't need to be close to you. Like that's, I think in the old world way of looking at things, that you have to find someone like locally close to you, but I think it's really not an issue. I mean, I've got clients coast to coast, in Canada and the US. And I mean, it's great when I go to Toronto or LA or New York, I go for lunch with a bunch of clients, and that's great, right? I think having that human connection is great, that face-to-face connection, but so I go visit, right? It doesn't have to be, just because you're in LA doesn't mean you have to have an LA lawyer, really. I think find someone you like first and foremost, and that knows their stuff, and then reach out and see what the vibe is.
That's really good advice. I think as I continue to build up my career, I'm working on music and really trying to build a catalog so I can get stuff into sync licensing. And I'm starting to collaborate with a friend of mine who's actually lives in Canada. And we're going to work on building. I think he's in Calgary.
Nice. That's close to me.
Yeah. I've never been to Canada. I'm from Minnesota, and it was like 5 hours south of the border. So everybody always thought I was from Canada because of my accent. But I'm like, no, I'm from Minnesota, which is close enough, I guess.
I know Minnesota very well. We always toured through there,
Oh, what parts of Minnesota did you tour through?
Well, just like it was always just driving through it mostly, because going through Canada wasn't as quick. So we dip down, go through whatever, right?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm always on the lookout for people that know what they're doing and just getting basic advice, just so I know, okay, this is maybe a situation where I should contact somebody else who knows what they're doing, or this is something I could handle, or I know where to go to source the information. So it's really helpful that you were on the show. You gave a lot of really, really good advice. I always love talking to attorneys because the law changes so much, and there's always so many nuanced situations that it really kind of rattles my brain. I've even thought about going to law school, so it's not totally out of the question yet.
You'd be great. You'd be a great lawyer.
Thank you. But thank you so much for being on the show, Kurt. How can the listeners follow you and reach out if they have any questions or even want to hire you?
Website is lawyerdrummer.com, Instagram and TikTok are just at lawyerdrummer. Shoot me a message like that. I've got a lot of articles on my website that are just, meant to empower artists. So go read them, spend some time. Like I try to make them somewhat entertaining, so, go read them and reach out if you have questions, and shoot me a message on Instagram or whatever. And happy to help.
Great. And I'll link all that stuff in the show notes below as well, so people can easily access it. But thanks for being on the show. Yeah, thanks for being on the show. Let me know when you're out in LA, we can maybe grab lunch or something, and keep in touch.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you, man. Appreciate it.